This module will describe preference assessments, which are strategies used to identify potential reinforcers. Why should we conduct preference assessments? Well, the success of an intervention to teach skills or reduce a problem behavior is dependent on the identification of effective reinforcers. Everyone likes different things. For most people, praise, free time, or fun activities are reinforcers. For individuals with developmental disabilities, reinforcers are often different. Furthermore, individuals with developmental disabilities can lack the language skills needed to say what they like or what they don't like. As a result, specific procedures to identify potential reinforcers are a useful tool to determine what an individual likes. Stimulus preference assessments are a set of procedures used to determine what stimuli an individual likes or prefers. They can be used with a variety of different stimuli: toys, sensory items, activities, edibles, and even social interactions. An implicit assumption regarding stimulus preference assessment is that highly preferred stimuli will serve as reinforcers and thus will be useful to change behavior, such as reducing problem behavior or teaching a new skill. Specifically, the purpose of stimulus preference assessments are to identify potential reinforcers to be used during assessment and treatment of problem behavior. You can use this information to establish a hierarchy of reinforcers from the most highly preferred, moderately preferred, and then the lowest preferred items. Next, we will describe the three forms of stimulus preference assessment that are most widely used. Some preference assessments consist of asking the individual or caregivers about preferred items and activities. These preference assessments are most often in the form of interviews or questionnaires. Other preference assessments involve presenting items or activities in a predetermined way and collecting data on each item that is selected, such as the free operant assessment or the multiple stimulus without replacement assessment. Interviews or questionnaires involve asking the individual or his parents and caregivers or teachers about his preferences. It is typically done by using open-ended questions, choices, or surveys. If possible, interview the person whose preferences you are trying to assess, as they probably know more about what they prefer than their caregivers do. Of course, the individual needs to have good enough language skills to be able to tell you what items or activities they prefer. Ask a variety of WH questions, such as, what is your favorite candy? Who do you like to play with? Or what is your favorite game to play on the tablet? Additionally, you can provide some verbal choices to help narrow the possibilities, like, do you like to play on the tablet or on the computer? If the individual doesn't have the required skills to answer these types of questions, asking the caregivers or teachers is a useful way to gather more information about potential reinforcers. But be aware, it may not always be as accurate. People forget and preferences change, and sometimes people haven't really paid attention to what individuals really prefer until you ask these types of questions. Structured interviews can be used with caregivers or teachers. An example of this type of interview is the Reinforcer Assessment for Individuals with Severe Disability, or RAISed. The informant is asked to answer questions about a variety of different stimuli, as well as provide more specific information about the conditions under which these stimuli are most preferred. Here are a few examples from the RAISed. The informant is asked questions about whether the individual likes to look at a mirror, spinning objects, or the TV, whether they like to listen to music or certain sounds, enjoy physical play, movements such as wrestling or dancing, or receive attention from others such as a hug or a pat on the back or other forms of praise. In summary, interviews are a relatively simple way to gather information about preferences, but they are not always accurate enough to serve as a standalone tool. Furthermore, they lack precision and make it hard to differentiate the most preferred from moderately or lower preferred items. However, it can be used as a first step to build a list of items and activities to include in a more formal assessment. A more formal type of stimulus preference assessment that is widely used is the free operant preference assessment. This assessment is called free operant because it consists of observing an individual for a specific period of time without interfering. This assessment is based on duration, as the data collected involves measuring how long the individual interacts with specific activities or stimuli that are presented. The activities that an individual engages in for the most time, when able to choose freely, are the ones that are considered most highly preferred. Two types of free operant assessments are possible depending on the items used. With a naturalistic free operant observation, the child is allowed to access any of the toys or activities available. In the case of a contrived free operant observation, the individual is allowed to access only pre-selected and pre-arranged toys and activities, which is most useful for non-ambulatory children, or if some activities are typically not available. To implement a free operant assessment, you will first need to either set up the environment with pre-selected items or lead the individual to a naturalistic environment. Let the individual move freely between items for the specified period of time, and for each item, record how long the individual engages with it. To determine the most highly preferred items, you will rank each item based on the total duration of engagement. While performing a free operant preference assessment, use a form to indicate the name of the items as well as the total duration the individual has interacted with each item during the designated period of time. Determine the percentage of time the individual has interacted with each item in order to determine the most preferred items. Free operant assessments are a more formal and direct way to determine an individual's preferences, and as such, provide more accurate information than interviews. Since there is no response requirement, free operant assessments are useful for individuals who will exhibit problem behavior when demands are presented or preferred items are removed. However, ranking may not be as precise as with trial-based preference assessments. A type of trial-based preference assessment is the multiple stimulus without replacement, or MSWO. It consists of presenting a row of stimuli in front of the individual and allowing him to choose one item at a time until they have all been selected. This type of assessment is called a trial-based preference assessment, as preference is assessed in a series of trials, where the order of choice is used as an index of preference. To run a multiple stimulus without replacement assessment, you will first need to gather 5 to 8 items and present them in an array in front of the individual, equally spaced from one another. Allow the individual to choose an item and let him interact with it for about 20 to 30 seconds. You will then remove this item from the array. The remaining items will then be rearranged and the individual will be allowed to choose again. This continues until all items have been selected or no item is selected after some time, usually 5 to 10 seconds. The procedure is then repeated 3 times and ranking of each item is calculated based on the order of choice. In the next video, you will see how an MSWO is being performed using 5 items.
Pick your favorite. Pick your favorite. favorite. Pick your favorite. Pick your favorite. Pick your favorite. Cool. Pick your favorite.
When is this going to stop? When is this going to stop?
Pick your favorite.
I don't know.
Try again.
I'm going to use it. Here's the next one.
Pick your favorite.
Where's my cell phone? I got a cell phone. Where's it, Jess?
Pick your. Pick your favorite.
What's
Okay, I think that's good.
Yeah.
Other ways of assessing an individual's preferences. When performing preference assessments, and in order to get the most accurate results, remember not to mix different types of reinforcers. For example, do not present food and toys at the same time. Additionally, be sure to use a timer and have items in order and ready to go. Potential reinforcers to include in interventions should be easy to deliver, control, and replenish. They should also be appropriate for the environment where they are used and do not disrupt ongoing behavior. Items that are typically available in the classroom are appropriate, for example, toys or tablet time, whereas offering to go to the movies or taking a break outside might not be feasible. High preferred and moderately preferred items, as determined by the preference assessment, should be used to assess and treat problem behavior. Highly preferred items, for example, can be used in functional behavior assessments to test for problem behavior associated with access to those items. They can also be used in interventions to build rapport, as well as they can be used as rewards for engaging in difficult or lengthy appropriate behaviors. You can use moderately preferred items in functional behavior assessments to test for problem behavior maintained by attention, or in interventions as rewards for engaging in easy or short duration behaviors. To summarize, stimulus preference assessments are a useful and necessary step when assessing and treating problem behavior. It is recommended that you use interviews initially to determine potential reinforcers that can be assessed with a more formal preference assessment process. Be sure to collect data during each assessment to calculate rank for each of these items.